Welcome to a new Paradigm of Education podcast. I'm Monique and Carrie Jeroslow, and we're both here today as your hosts, along with our special guest, Robert Saul. A new Paradigm of Education is all about transformation and change within education. So we are bringing together thought leaders of the world, change makers, not just teachers, groups of people from around the world that are interested in making global change within education. As Mahatma Gandhi says, be the change that you wish to see in this world. So I'd love to invite and introduce Robert Saul as our special guest today. He's a pediatrician with over 44 years experience. He has written many books, including, let's go through them, My Children's Children, Raising Your Citizens, Raising Young Citizens in the Age of the COLUMBINE, all about children, Thinking Developmentally, Nurturing Wellness in Childhood to Promote Lifelong Learning and Health, and as well as Conscious Parenting Using the Parental Awareness Threshold. I'm sure perhaps he's written more and done more that I am missing, but he's also developed the Parenting Awareness Threshold, which is a simple framework that guides parents and guardians to actively parent with self-awareness and empathy and compassion. So I'd love to introduce our special guest, Robert, and could you tell our listeners all about yourself, please?
Well, thank you. It indeed is my pleasure and privilege to be here today. I'm just recently retired from clinical medicine, but I'm both a pediatrician and a medical geneticist. So I've been on a journey, and I'd love to share that journey with you in terms of, because I think the journey I've been on in terms of is similar to the journey that y'all have been on, and would love to share that with you today.
That's brilliant. So I guess my first question is, what brought you to write about your COLUMBINE experience? I guess that really interests me as an educator because it's something that's very profound in the history of education, and it has made a radical change. So I'd like to start with that as a stepping point, if that's okay.
Sure. Let me, I finished my training in pediatrics in 1979 and got into primary care and medical genetics and wanted to be the best darn doctor you could be, and totally involved with everything I could be from the medical standpoint. But I realized about 14 years later that I wasn't paying back to my community. And so in 1993, I went to hear a speaker say 12 words that have had a profound impact on me ever since. And they'll be a part of the thread of our discussion going forward here today. For anything that happens in your community, I am the problem, I am the solution, I am the resource. So that tells me that I need to acknowledge and take personal ownership in things in my community instead of just say, oh, that's their problem. But to be part of the solution, and I want to be the solution, I have to devote my resources to it. Now, I heard that and I said, wow. But it took me months to figure out what to sort of do with it. And so then after several months, I went to the community and said, put me in, coach, I'm ready. I'm a professional in the community, and maybe I can really provide some additional support and get things going. And I felt quite good about what I was doing. April 20, 1999, two teenagers walk into a high school in Littleton, Colorado, massacre 13 people and kill themselves. COLUMBINE. I went to medical school. I graduated from high school and medical school in Colorado, but it wasn't that. It was just, how does this happen? How do we get to this? And so I put pencil to paper and asked myself, could this happen in my community? And the answer was yes. What have I done to make a difference? And the answer was not enough. So I sat down, and I don't know where this came from, maybe the inner resources, and penned what I considered to be the 5 steps to community improvement. And I'll get into those in just a minute, but over the next then 12, 13 years, I wrote over 160 op-ed articles about those in terms of what, in really action steps, what each of us could do to try to make a difference. And it's that work that has taken me through all these other books that you talked about, and when we get to conscious parenting, but that's the foundational work for what's happening. I am the problem, I am the solution, I am the resource. And those 5 steps are: 1, and I've chose my words carefully here. 1, learn to be the best parent you could be, because parenting is a lifelong learning experience. And not everyone has the same abilities. As a pediatrician, I know that because it would be easy for me just to say in a clinical setting, this is what you should do. Not everyone has the ability to process that in the same, because of their educational experience, because of their family upbringing, their culture, their socioeconomic situation. Everyone has different abilities. So my job isn't to tell parents what to do, but to empower them to be the best they can be. And sometimes that means I have to gently peek behind the curtain and see what I can do to help them discover a better path going forward. So that's number one, learn to be the best parent you can be. Number two, get involved, because that's critical to, obviously, if you're going to be part of community change. Three, stay involved, which I think is different. Sometimes it's easy to get involved. You get gung-ho, and then sustaining that effort is different. They're obviously very tied to each other. Number four is probably the most intuitive of this love for others, though it's seemingly very difficult in today's society where we're so divisive and so polarized. Number five is the most difficult, forgiveness. And I've been on a real path also learning about forgiveness, sort of personal forgiveness and social or communal forgiveness going forward, because that's so critical to each of these steps. And if we're going to really make a difference. And then the overall theme for that I put together into my first book, My Children's Children, was that we've lost track of parenting as an exercising and raising our children to be good citizens. I think happiness is a secondary effect. That is, parents, we always say, I just want you to be happy. I just want you to be happy. And when my parents divorced, that's what my mother said. I just want you to be happy, Bob. And fortunately for me, she set the example that I just didn't go out and pursue happiness. That I went out. She set the right example for me to go out and be a good citizen. That has now led me to be lead a much more fulfilled life, and that's what I'm trying to do with my children I've seen in my clinical practice, and children that I advocate for. So that's a long-winded introduction.
Yeah, I love there's so much that comes up for me, in terms of questions with everything that you said. I love what you said about knowing, learning, being the best parent that you can be, but you talk about it from a practical side, because this is the problem that I've had with a lot of parenting advice, or is that it's not practical. And what I love about learn to be the best parent you can be is what I'm finding as a parent now of an 8 and a 12-year-old is that my situation is completely different than anyone else's, right? And so to have one blanketed parenting advice, like you should do this or you shouldn't do this, felt like I was always failing, right? So I love that learn to be the best parent that you can be. I think it is very empowering. And I also love that I am the problem, I am the solution, I am the resource, because that's very, like I always look at raising my children is looking at what's going on with me, what's unhealed within me, and healing that so that I can be a better parent. And what's so interesting is seeing my children amongst other children who have all different backgrounds, how to navigate that, how to be supportive in the community with children who my children go to school with, who have all different kinds of home lives. Like how would you talk to someone or help someone who's, I feel like I parent as consciously as I can, although unconscious at times, I'm sure. But how do you talk to parents whose kids go to school with kids who don't have that, and how to parent your children to be conscious of other environments and other upbringings. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's in the last 8 years of my career, it became a very fine point for me, because I was the medical director of the largest Medicaid clinic in the state of South Carolina. So we indeed had families that had significant challenges, more than I had ever probably recognized, even in my prior 30 years of medicine. And then seeing those families, and plus the last several years, I dealt with families that had complex health conditions. So children that maybe had, feeding tubes, severe intellectual impairment, and a variety of things, and seeing families that had those challenges on top of their other socioeconomic challenges and other things that you talk about. An easy thing is just to throw your hands up and say, eat gads, I don't know what to do here. But I mean, the key to me, and it might sound trite, but the key to me is empathy. Being able to be able to put yourself, and the root word for empathy is M within pathos, suffering. So being able to put yourself within someone's suffering.
And that compassion, the compassion that you teach your children to have for, someone, and then teaching them, like you talk about being conscious citizens. How can we as parents teach our children to have that empathy and compassion with other children?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously you have to model it yourself first, and so they understand and see what's going on, and it's not words, it's deeds, or it's both, I would say. Just as a quick aside, sometimes we're out doing some things, and I'll say something, and my wife will say, "Ooh, that's not what you always talk about." And I go, "Uncle, you're right.
We're learning ourselves, right?"
That mirror is always difficult, but it just is being understanding, and being able to be exposed so much of what children might not be exposed to. Another thing is, that Bishop Michael Curry, who's the head of the Episcopal Church in the United States, talks about that the opposite of love is not hate, but the opposite of love is selfishness. So in many ways, selfishness keeps us from practicing empathy and understanding what's going on in the homes and in the situations that other children have. I mean, I can't tell you how many times when I would walk into a room, and the patient, again, with my patients that had significant socioeconomic challenges, they were 20 minutes late to the appointment. Well, when I was in private practice, that would have been unacceptable early in my career. My time is too valuable. Well, now I realize that their time is just as valuable, and that they might have had to hop 3 buses to get there. It was easy for me to get in my car. So I need to be so much more understanding. And the only way you can do that is an awareness, read, look, and be willing to learn and change.
Right. And ask questions too. I think tell me what it's like to be in your shoes. I want to understand and know. And that's, that I think is where we need to go as adults, children, everything is, what is it like to be in your shoes? And really try to understand that helps with empathy and compassion.
Right.
I wanted to ask you a bit more about conscious parenting versus innate ability. Could you go through the difference? So I myself, if I want to be a conscious parent, or am I already innately having that within myself? And are there skills or tips that you could help us with around that?
One, I don't think parenting is not an innate ability for me, especially in today's complex technologic society.
Yeah.
But number 2, let me give you a little background to that whole paradigm that I developed in terms of conscious parenting and the parental awareness threshold. When I shifted jobs late in my career, I took a position in leadership, so they had us go to a leadership seminar, and I was going, oh gosh, okay. But in that seminar, they talked about conscious leadership. And they talked about a line. And when you're above the line, you're open, you're receptive, you're ready to learn, you're conscious. When you're below the line, you're closed, you're defensive, you're always right. In a sense, you could say unconscious. And we're human. We're going to be above and below the line all times. And you know that we've all been at that 2:00 meeting when we're just sitting in the corners, rolling our eyes, saying, when's this thing going to be over? I'm so bored. And if we're a conscious leader, we now recognize we are below the line. Now we can purposely stay there if we want to, or we can say, oh, I need to get more engaged, or I need to change my responses. And so to change to above the line. I think the same sort of paradigm holds for parenting. When you're above what I call the parental awareness threshold, you're open, you're receptive, you're ready to learn. Mm-hmm. When you're below, you're closed, you're defensive, you're right, because I said so, because I'm the parent. And again, as parents, we're going to be above and below the line. But the point for me as conscious parenting is at 2 times trying to make a change, either in the moment or in retrospect. What do I mean? In the moment is when you're confronted with that situation, which is maybe a not so pleasant parenting situation, a difficulty, a child's behavior or whatever. You want to pause, assess, and choose, instead of have that, that perennial knee-jerk reaction, because I said so. And you want to pause, assess, or pause, and then choose. I mean, your choice in the moment might be the wrong choice. In retrospect, you might say, okay, this is what I'm going to choose. And then several days later, you go, oops, that didn't go so well. Or maybe even later that day, that didn't go so well. So hopefully you can try to be above the parental awareness threshold and try to make a more conscious decision to do better, to be more interactive, to listen, to engage with your child. Let me give you an example I have in the book. Mother, after school, picks up her child, and they go through the drive-up window at a fast food to get a drink because the child says, I'm thirsty. Mother passes it back to the child in the car seat. Now, don't spill this. 2 blocks later, Mom, my drink spilled. What your immediate reaction is to pull over, yell, I told you not to do that, and then try to clean up the mess and go on. Well, I purposely put in an example in the book that actually, because of that quick turn Mom made a couple blocks back, it knocked the book bag over, which knocked the drink over. So an appropriate thing is to pause, assess, and then choose the response. And an assessment in this situation might have yielded, oops, my initial impression was incorrect. Now, it could have been the child was careless and did whatever, but hopefully if you pause, assess, and choose, you will at least then hopefully choose a better response than just yelling or knee-jerk, you're a terrible kid, or whatever, but each situation we find ourselves within parenting is unique. Each parent is unique, each child is unique, each spouse or partner is unique, the siblings are unique, but each situation, you might respond to a situation at 8:00 on a Monday morning very differently than you would on 8:00 that Friday morning. So that's why each encounter almost requires you to be conscious, to pause, assess, and choose. And if you realize in retrospect, that didn't go well, then just figure out, talk to a trusted partner, whether that's your spouse, whether that's your sister, your brother, your mother, your aunt, your uncle, or just a good friend. Say, this is the situation I encountered. Things didn't go so well. What are your thoughts? Because you want to be open, receptive, and ready to learn rather than closed, defensive, and I told you so. I mean, some parental responses will be, I told you so, and this is what we're going to do. But it doesn't have to be vindictive. It doesn't have to be punitive in my eye most of the time. And just remember the other thing with being a conscious parent, I don't think it's an innate ability, is discipline. A lot of folks use discipline to equal punishment. The root word for discipline is disciple, which means to teach. So the whole process of discipline should be a teaching experience, much like what y'all are trying to do in terms of education. You're trying to choose appropriate discipline for educational models instead of punitive ways of educating folks.
Yeah. It's interesting as you talk about the parental response to whatever given situation at any given time, day. And I find that my responses are much more tight. The energy is more tight when I'm stressed, when I haven't had my time to process what's gone on in the day, or it's been an emotional day. And so I think a lot of it comes back to the parent, to having the awareness to look at what's going on within me that made me snap at my child, because ultimately they're just inquisitive spirits who don't know how to self-regulate yet, or they're learning. And I feel like it's my responsibility to look at what's going on within me, which is why I have a self-care practice, which is non-negotiable. It just makes me a better parent if I take time to understand what's going on. But that's where I find that, just in the real life, and I feel like that's something that we have to address as a community, as a society, is the stress, because stress is what makes us, be able to handle children or life less consciously, right? Is when the, adrenals are pumping and the cortisol is running through the body, and, I have deadlines or I have people needing me. So, that was a thought, of that whole scenario that you played out of let's have a drink and it's spilled. If I have had a kind of relaxing day and I'm just, kind of going with the flow of things, it's that fell. Okay, we can pull over. But if I'm stressed because they've been fighting and I've been having an emotional day, then it's oh my God, what just happened, right? So I feel like that it comes from the root of me, right? Which I guess is all parenting.
Well, related to that also, in terms of not an innate ability, is practicing the art of forgiveness. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've seen the book by Mitch Albom called Tuesdays with Morrie.
For sure. I love that book. Yeah.
And there's so many life lessons in there, but one in terms of the simple lesson for forgiveness that Morrie Schwartz was telling Mitch Albom was, forgive yourself first, forgive others, and do it now. Mm-hmm. And, I've been learning about forgiveness and about trying to understand forgiveness, because it really, much like parenting is lifelong learning, forgiveness is lifelong learning. Because what you do at 4 years of age in terms of, I'm sorry, versus 14 years of age, 24, 44, 84, it should be very different. And in many ways, you sort of have to forgive yourself first, and then seek and understand forgiveness or apologies from others. And a quick example there is one night, I think my son was about 7 or 8. He did something that I thought was very wrong, and I yelled at him. Not proud of what I did, but I'll fess up to it. I yelled at him, and he just melted. He just melted into a puddle. And my wife got mad at me for yelling, so we went into that family meltdown mode, where nobody talked. We just sort of walked by each other with, and then it was time to put him to bed. And I laid down with him. And I said, son, I'm so sorry. I think you did something that was wrong, but Dad's response was completely inappropriate. And I really want to apologize that we're in this together. And he said, Dad, would you be quiet? I said, why? He said, I hate it when you're nice. So, and I don't say that to pat myself on the back, but I say that to say, I guess I understood this conscious parenting a long time before I actually wrote it down.
There's a modeling of forgiveness for sure. We have had times where tempers have gone really high and we all come back together, even as young as, 4 or 5 years old, saying like, okay, let's look at how we just responded. And I don't feel great about it. And I want to model for you as a parent. I don't have to be right. I just want to be conscious and aware that that interaction didn't go, I don't feel good about it, like in my gut. And now they do that with us. They come to us and say, I'm sorry that I acted that way. And this is what was going on with me. And so, starting to have that conversation at a very young age has helped us practice that forgiveness with each other. So I think forgiveness is a huge part of being conscious citizens and being conscious people in any relationship. I love that.
And it's not just personal forgiveness, it's social forgiveness, communal forgiveness. We need to, as groups, understand what our group has done. An example is the American Medical Association years ago did not allow Black physicians. And after they changed that, there was a sort of an awakening 15 plus years ago when they say, whoa, what we did in the past, even though we're not doing it now, was very wrong. Now, and so they issued a group apology, if you will. They published an article and apologized for what they did, what they had done in the past. Now, they could have easily said, wasn't me, I didn't do it, but it was us. And if it was us, we need to be part of that solution to change our moral compass going forward. So in many ways, you can change the pronoun in the 12 words we talked about from I am the problem, I'm the solution, I'm the resource, to we are the problem, we are the solution, we are the resource.
I love that. Yes, I agree with you.
We need to, whenever we can, and again, it seems to be so difficult in our polarized society where things as simple as, in my estimation as a physician, getting a vaccine are seen as something that isn't correct. So it's very difficult. So our work is really cut out for us.
Yeah, because anything that's my question and kind of my meditations, anything that is, we are so polarized. So how do we come together? And I think that's what you're talking about, is those 5 steps, right? Learn to be, instead of the best parent you can be, learn to be the best person you can be. Get involved, stay involved, love for others, and forgiveness. That applies to that as well.
I was going to jump in and share as well around the new paradigm of education and what you're talking about. It's like a feeling of a global oneness and a global paradigm shift in terms of wholeness and completeness. So you're talking a little bit about separation, and I feel the paradigm shift that we are being given at this moment is a chance for everybody to kind of have more of an awareness of each person from where they're coming from, whichever standpoint they're coming from. And something that I really loved that you were sharing was above the line and below the line. And I really feel that that's really useful for teachers as well, for educators, whatever people wish to call themselves, not just for parents, because to me, that basically just means, am I conscious or am I not conscious? That's just making it very simple. And the moment that I step into a classroom, it's my duty to be conscious. Like, I am there to serve children, and therefore it is my duty to be highly conscious. So it's very amazing that you've got steps in place to allow teachers to create that space. And I do love the idea of the pause as well. Just having that moment to reflect, because especially in a busy classroom, a pause is huge. Like, sometimes a pause can mean like a pencil is thrown or something. Like, it can be quite traumatic taking a pause. So to actually have that moment to take a pause, even if it's just for a second, like you just breathe for 1 second and then you just take action fast, whatever you need to do to change the situation. Yeah, I just think that it's very necessary, those steps that you've been sharing. So yeah, thank you for that. I had a different question around the paradigm as well. It's still linked with what you're sharing. I've been asking all of our guests this question is, so what would you vision as a new paradigm of education? You've been sharing a lot about what it is anyway, but just would you like to just share a little bit more of if you could imagine that? I'd love to hear that.
Well, I mean, I think what I've developed, or maybe am still developing, since I'm not sure we finished developing until they put us under, the whole issue of the 5 steps to community improvement are integrally tied into education. The whole issue of conscious parenting, conscious leadership is, as you just said, is integrally tied into education. So it's, being an educator is not separate from being a parent. Being a parent is not separate from being an educator, and is not separate from being a citizen. Because again, to me, the goal of parenting is to raise your children to be good citizens. Good citizens care for each other. Good citizens care about each other. Good citizens engage in civil discourse. Good citizens can understand and listen to others. So that's what I want to see. The education, to me, should be, maybe let me distill it down here. A new paradigm for education should be, to be developing good citizens.
What if you were to maybe come up with some ideas of how to actually implement that? What do you think what like a program that could help children step into that? What would maybe that look like?
Well, to me, a simple solution, but one that it's tough to put the bones on, is to have citizenship or parenting taught in schools. And I mean, when I was in, when I graduated from school, some longer before y'all were born, probably, we had to take a civics class in school to learn about our government, to learn it so we could be sort of functional citizens, not necessarily good citizens, but we could be functional. We could learn that we had to go vote and we had to get involved. And we have sex education in schools, but we don't have citizenship education about learning how to. And some people argue, well, that's what the church is for. I don't think so. I mean, I think being a good citizen, yes, is a part of practicing a faith and being a faithful person to whatever faith one has. But people that do not have any faith can still be excellent citizens and should be excellent citizens. So the simple solution for me would be to have some educational program regarding citizenship. The curriculum, I suspect, would be difficult to develop and would probably in the state of South Carolina would be controversial. But that would, to me, would be a start. And then just even if you couldn't come up with a formal curriculum, having little guidebooks along the way that can be useful in terms of talking about some of the issues we talked about here in terms of parenting involvement, love for others, and forgiveness. And again, some people would argue that those are just faith-based. I would argue that they're life-based.
Absolutely. And, my kids go to a little tiny school downtown in my town. And one of the ways that they bring this idea into practical body experience is to be involved with what's going on in our town. Like we're a trail town. We're on the Mountains to Sea Trail here in North Carolina, and they're on the trail doing trail maintenance and connecting with the people passing through the trail and showing up in terms of how they can contribute to having a healthy, vibrant downtown area. They're even starting a little store and, just understanding those aspects, which I feel is helping them understand what it is like to be a contributor to this community. But I'm so curious, and I think the classes that you're talking about is definitely an important foundation. I wish there was a parenting class. I don't know, I don't know how you do that with learn to be the best parent you can be, but teaching how to be above the line, below the line, like even that is important to just acknowledge, because I think a lot of parents, teachers, educators don't even have that understanding that there's even a line, so it's just all very interesting.
There's a movement afoot in several areas to sort of enhance social emotional learning in schools, and I think that's obviously part of this, and that's part of the that should be integrated, because when those situations arise, as you said, Monique, when that pencil comes flying out of the air or whatever, and you pause, assess, and choose a response, there is a significant teaching point there in some way, shape, or form, rather than just being ticked off and either you being mad at them or being mad at yourself that the situation in the classroom got out of control, that a pencil could fly. I mean, there's lots of ways people would look at that, but it's becoming more connected. It might sound trite, but that to me is an integral part of all of this.
Yeah, I think connection is very beautiful, and what you've been sharing around collaboration, and I like to call it global citizenship. It's probably slightly different than what you're imagining, but I'm a global citizen. I've spent my whole life traveling. I've been in 30 countries. I've taught in schools all around the world. So I kind of broaden this way of citizenship to be kind of this worldly image that I have. And what I have seen is that it is already happening. We have a lot of different communities coming into schools to teach. We have the old paradigm of students still being able to go outside to learn. What I see in a new paradigm is there's this fluidity between businesses, between entrepreneurship, between, what you're saying, these church groups or different types of global community citizens all coming together in schools and out of schools. And it becomes just like a whole connected web of learning. And so all the definition points of curriculum are not really necessary, because there's choice and there's space and there's just accessibility for everybody. And it actually is beautiful, because I see this vision of like, there's a place for everybody. So there's like an abundance for everybody. There's not just like these two positions. Okay, I'm the teacher, you're the student. We've got like all these different people as part of the school community, including the parents, including all the community members. And so I just see it really abundant, really fruitful. And I actually see it's really happening at the moment with what's happening in the world. A lot of people are looking for alternatives. They're not happy with what's happening, and they're like, well, what else can I do? And so I've actually started to see this new paradigm begin, and it really excites me. It excites me to meet people like yourself as well, that have like, just this beautiful heart for humanity, and actually really care about helping children and care about helping parents to know how to help children as well. I think it's just amazing. So I wanted to know too, another question about, currently you're not practicing as a pediatrician, but was there any other kind of adventures or any other things that you're doing currently that you wanted to share with us as well around that?
Well, I'm actively continuing to branch out and work on a blog on my website. I actually had a book project started that has sort of, COVID has sort of taken all the air out of my sails, and maybe I can get re-energized, because the project has been what really matters. And I sort of wanted to sort of develop that, because to me, truth, trust, civility, science, diversity, and faith are the 6 things that matter. And I've been trying to I've written maybe a third of the book, but I've sort of stalled out right now. So I'm waiting to get re-energized on that. Mm-hmm. But getting back briefly to what you're talking about, sort of being a worldly experience, there's a great little book by a fellow by the name of Basil Hero about the moon visitors, the people that went to the moon. 24 people went to the moon, or either walked or went around the moon. And he interviewed all of those people, and looking at the common thread of what they were doing is one of the 2 things that come to mind. One is they all were taking great risks for the common good. And the common good is something that we sort of seems to be taking a back seat, at least feel like in our society. But the number two thing that's really interesting, James Lovell, one of the astronauts, that said that you don't go to heaven when you die. In his estimation, you go to heaven when you're born. This is heaven on earth, and it's up to us to realize that and continue to see the fruits of that.
I love that so much. That's such a beautiful way to almost wrap up our gathering together. I just want to ponder on that. I've really enjoyed this conversation and just learning all those different amazing like steps that we can use, and not even steps. It's like almost like a consciousness stepping into those steps as well. Was there anything?
Even asking that question? What happened today? What was the problem? Was I the solution? What resource? Like that gives a really great introspection. So I love that.
And and my book is purposely short, so it's meant to be pithy. It's meant to come back to as you need to. It's not meant to say, okay, this is what my child did today. What's the answer on page 52? This book isn't it. This book is about a paradigm, a way of thinking. And again, each parent has different abilities in terms of dealing with this.
I love that. And where can people find your book? On your website, or is it on Amazon?
Well, it's on Amazon, but it's they can get it through see the contact through my website, which is mychildren'schildren.com.
Beautiful.
And I chose that title because I wanted to write it for my children's children. At the time, I had no grandchildren. Now I have two. I wanted to write it for the children that I've seen over the tens of thousands of children that I've seen as a pediatrician, and the thousands of children I've advocated on behalf of. So my children's children, pediatricians, have a very paternalistic or maternalistic approach to life. We want to take care of all children and families.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful.
I love that. Our tagline on our book is also about the next generations of change makers in our New Paradigm of Education book. And I received that information. I wrote the word generation and I was like, this just doesn't feel correct. It's going to be generations that we're impacting. It just takes that one little seed to be planted, and then that's the fruit that grows into the next generation and the next generation. So I love that you're also aligned with that. And I want to thank you so much for being with us today, Robert Saul. And was there any final word of wisdom before we close for today?
No, it's been my pleasure. I really have enjoyed this, and glad to talk again sometime in the future when our paths cross.
Yeah, thank you very much. So to all our viewers and listeners out there today, thank you so much for tuning in to a New Paradigm of Education podcast with our guest today, Robert Saul, and your presenters, Carrie, Jeroslow, and Monique Sayers. And if you are interested in finding out further information about Robert, all of the information will be down in the show notes below. So we'll close by saying, be the change that you wish to see in this world, and have a beautiful day, everybody.